Hello, everyone, and welcome to God and All Things. I'm Tori.
And I'm Kariana.
And today we're going to be discussing some Christ principles of Christ we can learn from the movie Thor. We're continuing our Marvel journey once again, and we're going to just focus on the first Thor movie, so we won't be talking too much about the other two. I don't even think I have notes about any further along things that happen with Thor,
nope,
like we did with Iron Man. I guess Iron Man has a little bit more of an intense plot line than Thor, but that's a whole other discussion. Anyway,
yeah, it's pretty contained.
Yeah, for sure. So let's kick it off by discussing, of course, the summary of it. If you've never seen it or just need a little refresher on kind of what happens within the basic premise of Thor. So, on the planet Asgard, the gods and goddesses of Norse legend actually reign, protecting the 9 realms from disaster. The 2 young princes, Thor and Loki, work to be worthy of the throne, but both have a great deal to learn. Meanwhile, on Earth, Eric Selvig, Jane Foster, and her intern Darcy seek to understand strange phenomena occurring around the desert of New Mexico. Perhaps the answers lie with the Asgardians, and that's where their paths will cross. So, personal experiences. I have mentioned before to Kariana that Thor, especially the first Thor film, actually is probably one of my least favorite ones to watch. I think this time around I liked it a little bit better, but it's still, like, the first half is really good, like the first 30 to 40 minutes is really interesting, up until he, like, tries to get the hammer and can't, is really interesting, and then after that, Thor's story loses me, and then, like, I just like Loki's stuff that's going on with him, so that's how I felt this time around specifically, too. Like, I mean, it's like halfway through the movie, or a little over halfway, that he tries to hold the hammer, and that's all interesting. And then after that, it's like, all of a sudden, he just changes a little too fast for me. The development that it's trying to have isn't shown in a very comprehensive way to me, and in a very realistic way at all, so I don't like it as much. But I do think Thor and Loki and their relationship and a lot of the stuff that goes on with them is very interesting, and like I said, I really like Loki's story in this as well, so.
Cool.
Yeah, that's my experience. What about you?
I don't have, like, a super clear, like, kind of how I talk about with Iron Man. Like, I remember really vividly Iron Man coming out. I remember liking Thor just as much as a kid, like it, but I don't, like, have that super clear memory of when it came out. But I've always loved it. I've always loved Thor as a character, even pre-MCU coming about. I really, really loved Thor as a character. I always thought he was cool. Yeah. I don't know. I have a lot of. I was actually paying attention because you've mentioned his development happening too fast and not being believable. I was like, okay, I don't remember that, so I'm gonna pay attention and look for that. And I can, like, confidently say that I didn't feel that way.
Okay,
Like
good.
Watching for unrealistic or too fast development, I was like, no, this all really makes sense to me. It really does. I appreciated Loki more probably than I have in the past.
Okay.
I think in the past, like, I've just never been a Loki fan. I know that's blasphemy to so many people. Like, I'm sorry, don't hate me. I don't know. I don't know why it never stuck out to me. It was always just kind of, like, there and mildly or really annoying.
Okay, fair enough.
And watching it this time, like, being older, it was definitely easier to appreciate his story and what he's going through. But then when I think about it more, like, it's one of the few cases where the more I think about it, like, the less interesting I think he is.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Just like, just like a basic, just like really fast, not going into any depth or anything. He has this really, really interesting background, right, that you're learning about and he's learning about, and it feels like it should affect and impact him. But then once, like, all of his motives and plan is revealed, it's like everything that he was planning on from the very beginning. It's like it didn't actually affect and impact him.
I actually think that he shifted his plans or, like, made them more intense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say, I wouldn't say that there's, like, sorry if that sounded too extreme. Like, I think that it impact, like, there is an impact on his character, and, like, maybe it shifts and changes certain things, but, like, he's still kind of just doing the same thing that he was planning on from the beginning.
Maybe.
You know?
I don't know. There's a specific
okay.
comment that he makes that I'll get into as we go along that made me think a little differently. Yeah, but I will also say... Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I was just going to wrap up.
I guess I hadn't remembered my first time, but I actually saw this after I watched Avengers. Same thing. I think the only one I saw before I saw Avengers was Captain America.
Dang. And you were not in the MCU
I was not.
yet.
The Avengers was what won me
That's
over.
That's what got you.
Like, when I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm in this, and I'll watch the other ones and stuff. Like, it just wasn't part of my family to really pay attention. I think Noah was maybe the only one that was really aware of stuff. And maybe my parents had seen, like, Iron Man without us, well, like, on a date or something. Right. But I just didn't really pay attention to it until Avengers. But I will say, even though I don't think the development is as I would like it to be, like, I would have liked a little bit more with it, and there's one comment that makes it so that I don't like it as much, and that's made later on in the movie. Okay. So I'll come to that too. Yeah, I'll be interested. But I will say this time around it didn't bother me as much. If it wasn't for that comment, I think I would have liked it. Okay. But they make a comment later on that points to a certain thing being the cause of him changing. Whereas when I was watching this time, I felt like it was more things going on. That I was like, okay, this is leading him to, it's not just this one thing. But then they make a comment acting like it was that one thing. And I was like,
I'll be interested to know if that, like, is subconsciously affecting me. And once you bring it to my attention, it'll change my mind. We'll see
how we do this. But let's just get into it, starting with our gospel principle, of course. And we are going to be discussing agency and accountability through Thor. So let's have Kariana introduce that to us.
Yeah. So I guess I just kind of focused on agency, but that's they go together. Works, but agency, or free will, is really one of God's greatest gifts to his children, since it's the gift that kind of allows us the opportunity to use every other gift he's given us. All of us are going to be tempted by good and evil, which means that some souls were lost in the premortal world and some will be lost in mortality. But with our ability to choose our paths for ourselves, we're able to become more like our Savior and ultimately gain celestial glory.
Beautiful. Well done summing that up. And I really it was interesting watching this because my first instinct was like, with Iron Man, the humility, because I feel like that's a huge part of this. But especially watching both Loki and Thor's journey, like agency and their different uses of it at different points is very interesting.
No, I loved when you brought... At first I was like, man, agency, like... Is this the one to use that? Like, agency, it can be applied to anything. Like, all characters and all stories revolve around agency. But then I was like, no, there are actually, like, in this story in particular, there's so many different ways it could have gone depending on every single character's choices and what they do.
They're all making choices and they're having to face the consequences of their choices.
To, like, worlds and
Thor, Loki,
things that don't seem like Odin, a big deal to them either, that are impacting more people than they realize. Lots of interesting choices.
Really, really good. So let's get into this. So this film starts off, we're actually looking at Jane Foster, her intern Darcy, who is always a joy. She either annoys you or you love her. There's a few maybe who just don't care about her.
Yeah, I'm pretty indifferent towards her, I'll admit.
I think she's got a charm to her. So I was one of those who was really excited when she showed up in WandaVision, So sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen that, but there you are.
I don't remember that happening. That's crazy.
Well, there you go. And Eric Selvig is the other one. They are chasing this storm that they've caught on their system. Jane specifically has been leading this research on some strange phenomena in the atmosphere around New Mexico. And so they're astrophysicists. Can I say that? Probably not, so we'll just...
Except Darcy. She's a political science major.
She's a political science major.
But she was the only science. She was the only applicant. It's sciencey enough, I guess.
It worked. Hey, if she wanted to do it, good for her.
It provides really, really good context for the characters to explain complicated science things to the dumb audience.
Exactly. Yes. And
we love those
to explain
characters.
Why she is the way she is amongst these other people. Of course, then she ends up going on to also study astrophysics after this. So good for her.
Changed her world. Agency, the decisions you make.
Exactly. Can impact everything. Make her a part of dealing with WandaVision. So here we are. So this weird storm ends up coming, and it's like just right in this one spot, and like this thing appears, and it's like all dusty and all this stuff, and then she ends up hitting a man with her car. And it happens to be Thor. So then we kind of go back in time to see how Thor got there. And basically we see them as children. It's Thor and Loki as children talking to Odin. He's explaining the history of their people and fighting the frost giants specifically and bringing peace to the Nine Realms. And they're kind of the guardsmen of the Nine Realms. So during this conversation, they talk about the frost giants, and Odin tells them that they were both born to be king, but only one of them would have the throne, basically. And we don't really understand what that means yet. We will a little later, what he probably meant by that. But then we flash forward to them being adults, and Thor is about to be crowned king, right? Like he's being coronated by Odin. And in the middle of this, well, he has a very cocky approach. Let's just mention that. That's very key to everything. He's a very arrogant and vain person. And
or at least like
boastful.
Young and stupid. I
think
young
I wouldn't and stupid, but I would say he's young and arrogant.
I would agree that he's arrogant, but I just like I don't want it to give it like a Tony Stark feel, you know, because like Tony Stark is vain and arrogant, but like I would not call him and Thor like the same. Thor is very young and naive, and he's strong and he's talented and he knows it.
Yes,
that's kind of where I'd put him. So yeah, definitely arrogant. But yeah, like a youthful naivety kind of thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay. And interestingly enough, it's almost like Loki's like more mature than him in a lot of ways.
100%.
But in like he's still a child in his own way too, which
I think he just gives off more mature vibes because he's quiet.
I think he's just more of a like I think he manages his emotions better than Thor does. And that, like, he has
at least plans around them better.
Well, yeah, but he has, like, the emotional maturity as far as he's aware of his emotions and can control when they show.
Yeah.
Whereas
he's still young
that doesn't
and
mean
naive,
that he's good.
But,
like, it doesn't mean he doesn't let his emotions drive him in any way, but, like, he's able to control and temper them.
They just don't show.
It's not as, like, Thor's very, like, spontaneous and, like, I mean, basically, like, they both are in the Norse myth. Like, they're both, like, they have those same personalities of this big boastful warlike man versus this kind of more cunning and manipulative and like emotional. I think Loki is actually pretty emotionally intelligent. He just manipulates and abuses that intelligence, but like he has a lot of emotional intelligence for himself and for other people, and that's why he's so manipulative and able to do so much with his mom and his dad, and even with Thor throughout all the movies. He's constantly emotionally manipulating Thor until Thor finally realizes
he understands not only himself but other people's emotions and how to use them against them. But he's still very young and naive and doesn't understand the world entirely still.
So then right in the middle of this coronation, the frost giants end up breaking into the castle to steal back it's called a casket or something.
I don't know why.
I don't understand what it is either. It's like the source of their power, basically.
Just somehow gives them their power. Yeah. Even though they like still
can do
have
everything.
Ice powers. Yeah. Who knows?
Don't really know. It must like enhance something or whatever.
Again, comment. Are you into Norse mythology? Are you an MCU fanatic? Tell us what's up with the casket.
If you have a little bit more information.
Yes. Obviously, we're lightweights over here. Didn't realize
we're
that.
We're very basic fans, apparently, but I would say we're maybe in the middle.
Maybe
as far as fans.
Oh yeah, probably. I would say we're in the middle.
Yeah, no more than a lot of people, but we haven't necessarily studied the comics, so we don't know stuff that's not in the movies. Anyway, they attack and try to steal this casket, and they're stopped by Odin's men, but it completely ruins the coronation. So it's stopped, and he's not able to get crowned. And so his reaction is, I want to find out how they did this. Which he says, I want to find out how they did this, but really he wants to just go kill people. Like, he just wants to go take them out. And Odin's look, they didn't get that far. Our destroyer was able to destroy them and do its job. And yes, we don't know how they got here, but like we have this treaty, like we need to think logically about this. It's only a couple people. It doesn't mean that their whole people were trying to do anything just because it was a couple of them. And so he's looking at it as a king should, as like, let's take this one step at a time. We know we need to strengthen some borders and stuff. And Thor is just constantly arguing, like, no, we need to go after them. We need to destroy them. How can you let them do this? And all this stuff. How are you so weak as an old man, not realizing that it's coming from a place where Odin used to be Thor and has experienced things and grown up and become a more mature person. One of the things I love specifically that Odin says, and I don't think I wrote this down exactly, but he basically says, we're not going to break peace for the choices of a few. And I think that's so good. Like, I just think it's so common for us, especially in today's world where there's a lot of confrontation and conflict online and stuff, to take the comments of a few and magnify them to, like, destroy your sense of peace and just tear relationships apart, tear just people apart through these online discussion groups because of one or two people who made a comment or who did something wrong, and they're like, oh, this whole group of people is like this, or oh, everybody who even sort of sympathizes with this person who did this horrible thing, they're also awful, and we're gonna cut, like, our population in half based on how you feel specifically about this thing, and it's gonna be very black and white. And I love that Odin specifically says we're not going to ruin peace just because of a couple people who wanted to ruin peace. Like, we're going to maintain that peace and be peacemakers. The talk I primarily focused on for this conversation was the talk given by President Nelson in April's conference from 2023 this past year, where he talks about being peacemakers and prioritizing being the type of people who invite peace. And that doesn't necessarily mean we agree with people or that we, like, don't deal with problems as they arise, but it just means that we're not going in with a spirit of conflict and confrontation.
This scene is definitely, like, a little bit hard for me. Okay. listening to your comments on it is a little bit hard for me just because I think I'm more of a Thor.
At least you can admit it. That's all right.
And so it's like I can definitely, listening to Odin's response to it, I feel like Thor does. I'm like, what? What's wrong with you? What are you talking? He's like so nonchalant. He's like, oh yeah, well, like, find where the crack is and, like, fix it. And logically in my head as an adult, I'm like, okay, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. But I'm like, they just infiltrated. Like, are you kidding? Like, if I imagine my home, my country, you know, like my place being infiltrated and attacked like that, like, that's not something that I'm just like, oh yeah, we'll just, like, find a solution and it'll be good. I'm, like, mad. And so, but the line that you quoted is definitely the one where, like, when I was watching, I thought, okay, that sounds like the wisdom of an experienced king, you know, we're not going to ruin peace because of the choices of a few. I'm like, because that brings me back to the whole race isn't bad. These people did something wrong. And that's where I'm like, okay, he sees something here that I can't see. That's really meaningful. And anyway, the scripture that I wanted to bring up in connection with that, because I want to bring it up here at the beginning because I think it's interesting throughout, is 2 Nephi 2:16. Talking about agency. Wherefore the Lord God gave unto man that he should act for himself. Wherefore man could not act for himself, save it should be that he was enticed by the one or the other. And the index says, I like the way that the index, like, simplifies it. Yeah. Man could not act for himself, save he was enticed by good and evil. And I think it's really interesting to think about how Thor and Loki are both enticed by good and evil. Mm-hmm. They've both grown up together, right? We're talking about two men who have the exact same shared experiences. Yes. Obviously, they're different, and their different personalities have led them to different places, but that same parents, same world, same house, and they've both been enticed by the same temptations. Throughout the movie, they get enticed by, we see, you know, different things pulling at them, but both of them have the opportunity to choose good and to choose evil. And right here is something where we're seeing Thor have his own natural man reaction of, like you're saying, in his heart, he really just wanted to go kill a bunch of people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's his true intention, which is that, you know, that evil natural man inside of him, that's his struggle. His personal struggle is kind of that violent, like, rash tendency. versus the good that his father is presenting him with. This, I understand you, but I've been there and I know better, and this is what we're actually going to do because this is the right thing to do. And the choice that Thor makes based on those temptations causes problems. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Loki is really, really quiet up to this point, so we don't see where he's at, but we'll see, like, we kind of see the same things where he has the opportunity to go, he's enticed by both sides. And that's really like the crux of agency. I guess it feels like self-explanatory, but it feels really important to me to like bring to attention, like, this is the pivot point. This is things happen that tempt them and they have to choose good or evil.
That's really, really true. Like, it's important to realize that all of this is coming down to choices, and I think this movie showcases that so well, as far as it's not just like their personalities and one's just a bad guy and one's a good guy. They're like you said, they're both raised in the same house, they have the same nurture, and so they just are being presented with choices, and the ones they make take them in their different directions as they go along. And for Thor, it takes him to a bad place and then a good place when he learns. Right. Loki, it takes him to a bad place and badder and badder. Right.
And he has the opportunity to learn and come back and chooses not to.
He could turn, but he doesn't. Yeah. He has multiple opportunities throughout this movie and other movies to kind of come back, and he chooses not to over and over.
Whereas Thor makes the choice to come back.
I wasn't going to bring up later movies, but I will say in the third Thor movie, he
goes back down.
Yes, he goes back down, but he also directly tells Loki, you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. You keep doing the bad thing where you could change, right? Like, at any point. He literally says that to him.
I didn't remember that.
And so
it's true. Loki's story, just from here on out, just kind of repeats of him like pretending and having the chance, and you have so much hope, and then he chooses not to.
And then he goes back. He's the god of mischief.
Yeah.
And he just keeps living up to that. But
that's okay. Actually, the fact that you bring up that label is really interesting to me, because labels have such an impact on the way we use our agency, which is why President Nelson's talk in 2021, or was it just last year, the young adult thing about being a child of God and a child of the covenant and a disciple of Christ. I can't remember,
but I do remember that talk.
I bet it was just last year. But yes, I don't remember the title. But if you're a young adult, you definitely know what I'm talking about, because it has been talked about nonstop since then, where he talks about labels and says, label yourself first as a child of God. Hopefully I'm not messing up the order. As a child of the covenant, and and as a disciple of Christ or a disciple of God. Like, those are your labels, because your labels, like, they impact the way that we think about ourselves. And so Loki has this label of the god of mischief, and I hadn't thought about this before, but like, when does that come about? Probably like after he's made these choices. But then how much of this label of the god of mischief is leading him to say, well, I choose mischief, I'm the god of mischief, and therefore I have to be mischievous, and so I can't like not betray these people, and I can't not go back on my word, because otherwise I wouldn't be living up to my label. And so, just thinking about the way we label ourselves and the way we label others, because everybody has their agency, but that doesn't take away our responsibility to help other children of God use their agency wisely,
Yeah, it's true. And especially when, like, his brother is the god of thunder.
Right.
And that sounds so dope, and everybody loves that and, like, wants to see that in him all the time and see his power and stuff. Like, Loki's like, well, this is what I have, so I'm gonna use it to the best of my ability. True, So there's also a comparison going on there a lot, which we see at the beginning of this for sure.
And maybe I wasn't being fair earlier, even saying that they're raised in the exact same circumstances, because, Loki brings up the fact that Thor is always the favorite and Thor is the heir, and so they are kind of... We don't know.
He's the warrior.
We haven't seen it. We don't know how Odin treated them, but from Loki's perspective, he's been treated as the inferior his entire life, which has also impacted him.
And I would argue throughout this movie, we definitely see that they're friends like Thor more. There's been
sure.
Like, there were a couple moments where I was like, based on the information you have, like, I don't know that Loki's wrong. you know, at a couple points.
With the friends, I would even call them Thor's friends. Like, to me, it gives, like, Loki hangs out because he's the younger brother vibes.
Yeah,
like, I would not call them Loki's friends.
Yeah.
So,
I would agree.
Definitely. I hope he has his own little, like, sad magic friends. Not just the
I'm
not
guessing
just the boastful
not,
warrior friends.
since we don't see any.
That's
I
so
think
sad.
his closest person to him, because she has the same powers as his mom, is probably the only one he really connects with, which is why the second one things hit so hard.
Yeah.
So.
Him and Thor do have an interestingly close connection, though. I remember being a little surprised as I was watching. I was like, they really are like brothers. And Thor really does, like, love him. And they hang out together and they consult together and they advise each other and comfort each other, all in this movie, and act like it's completely normal. And from Loki's side, we don't know how much of that is real. But from Thor's side, he just acts like that's just their relationship, you know? Mm-hmm. So I was kind of surprised, like, how close and like brothers they seem. And especially later in the movie, Thor, like, is just, you know, he's like, I genuinely don't know what I did wrong. Like, whatever I did to wrong you, I don't know. But, but I'm sorry. Because he's just being him, and he loves his brother, and maybe that doesn't always come across because siblings aren't always great at that, but...
And he's been youthful and arrogant.
Yeah, and he's dumb.
He's egotistical.
Yeah.
Like, he's focused on himself all the time.
Which, again, not entirely, like, abnormal, but not
definitely
good,
not abnormal, but
But I was surprised at just how, like, kind of normal brother relationship they really have. It kind of makes Loki's actions hurt worse when you really think about, like, how lost and confused and hurt Thor would be realizing that.
And almost like realizing how lost and confused and hurt Loki feels to be acting like that.
Yeah, how he has felt this whole time. Yeah. For sure.
So...
And realizing that you were part of the cause of that.
Gosh.
Oh no.
That suddenly turned into so much more of an emotional movie.
Okay. All right. Dang.
Well, anyway, continuing on that strain of the plot.
The second scene.
Hey, some of the biggest things happen. It's okay.
It's true. It's setting the stage.
Exactly. So then
From here, it's just fight scenes.
Exactly. A lot of fight scenes. So then we see Loki manipulate Thor. And it's kind of hard to tell how much is manipulate. Like, I'm like, I wonder, I'm sure a lot of it is manipulation, but I'm sure there's at least some level of, like... I don't know. It's so hard to say, especially in this one. Like, in other ones, because we know Loki's trouble in the other ones, like, it's played off as, like, you know, he smiles when they leave the room, or like...
Which I was watching for, and they don't do in this movie, which makes it really hard. I almost wonder if they're trying to trick you because you don't know that Loki. Yeah, so that's a good point. In later movies, so you just like in every other movie with Loki, you want to believe, you want to believe that some of it is real, but is any of it? Probably not.
No. So anyway, he basically manipulates him into getting Thor to go do what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And
super cleverly.
Yeah, very cleverly, because he's like, no, this is such a bad idea.
He's literally telling Thor not to the whole time.
But he like plants that seed. He's like, there's nothing you can do without disobeying father. And he knows Thor's gonna be like, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to disobey father. Like, you're right. And he just knows Thor so well that he like knows that's gonna work. But then you see him in the back, and he's like actually looks like, oh no, like he's like rubbing his brow, like the stress.
He's all stressed about
what is going on. But he goes with them. So I don't know what,
which is kind of suspicious if you're like looking for it. But.
I don't know. It's like but it also comes across as like a loyal brother. Like, okay, if you're gonna do this, I'll come with you. You know,
like, if I wasn't looking for it, I think it wouldn't get me at all. But again, knowing, I was kind of like, that's actually kind of weird that he like went to this. Like, what Thor wants to be a battle. I don't know.
Yeah. And so, anyway, they get there, and Thor approaches Laufey, is the king's name, and asks him how he got in, but he's not very polite about it. He's very aggressive.
Imagine that.
He also shouldn't be there in the first place, as per the treaty, so that's just instantly,
so he's already broken a treaty.
Calling it to war and violence by even going, which is part of the problem. And so... they go, and Heimdall also was interesting in this because I feel like he comes across as so wise, but in this moment I was like, I'm not really sure why you listen to Thor if Odin's the one you're supposed to be listening to. But anyway, he does.
And he comes across as very, like, principled. Like, he's very, this is the rule, therefore I do the rule. But then he spends the entire movie twisting those rules, and I'm like, are you principled? Like, What's going on?
Like,
he's
it's
a
almost,
really interesting
it kind
character.
of ends up feeling like he just likes Thor more than the others. Like everybody else does.
Interesting.
In a way. So anyway,
which you kind of wish he wasn't. You kind of wish he was just an unbiased character.
If he should prefer anybody, it should be the King Odin.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying?
Biased towards the law.
Yes, exactly. Not towards either of the princes. But anyway,
there's my next nerd question. I want to know, like, is Heimdall, does he feel that way because he is supposed to be that way? Like, in the comics, is he more of this kind of, like, objective character? Or is, like,
and it was just the plot that called him to be a little more of a Thor lover.
Did, like, the writers of the movie say, well, this is actually convenient to the plot, so that's what we're gonna do? Or is he actually a flawed character? I'm curious. If you know, let me know.
For sure. Anyway, yes, so Thor approaches Laufey and is like, how did you get in? They're having this not very polite interaction. It looks bad. They're getting surrounded by these other frost giants, and it's getting pretty tense, and Loki's like, okay, we'll accept your offer to leave. Thanks, let's go. And so they're about to leave, and then one of the frost giants insults Thor, and Loki's like, dang it. So immediately it erupts into violence on all sides, and they're fighting, and then Odin comes in.
Okay, I do have something that's really interesting to me. Yeah, right there. So this is something that really, really stood out to me, where the frost giant makes his insult, and you can, like, Loki makes his comment. You can see in all of his friends' faces, like, they know, like, Thor just got insulted. We're about to fight, right? But Thor he's walking away, so his back is turned to the frost giant, and the camera goes to Thor, and he smiles, and then turns around, or maybe doesn't turn around, I don't remember, but throws his hammer at this frost giant and attacks. And I thought that smile was so interesting because it's so premeditated. It's not like the frost giant insulted him and he just got so mad and erupted because that's his personality. Like, he made a conscious decision to say, I just got insulted and therefore I'm going to do this.
It, like, gave him permission, and he was like, yes, this is what I wanted.
And now, thinking about the conversation we just had about labels, I wonder if that almost goes back to it. Like, that's his personality. That's who he is. He erupts. He doesn't take any crap. You know, that's Thor. And so when he gets insulted, all of his friends know what he's gonna do because that's what he does. And so, like, that's what he does. Yeah.
It makes him feel powerful, not just, like, in the sense of I can beat these guys, but also, like, he knows everybody knows him. Yeah. Around him, and is like, okay, let's go.
So then he has to do that. And so he's almost letting this label control his agency. But he does make a conscious choice, you know? Yeah. Because it's almost easier if he had truly just erupted, then that would be more of this, like, personality fault, natural man getting in the way of things, kind of. Like, it's almost more forgivable because it's like, you know, I have my struggles, I do things without thinking, whatever. But he thought about it and chose to do something that he knew his father didn't approve of, that he knew was dangerous to his nation, world, whatever. And that was just fascinating to me. That, I don't know, because he was ready to leave, and so it's interesting, like, what really his purpose for going there in the first place. He chose to go. Like, had he already chosen to attack no matter what happened, and this was just his opportunity to? Was he not really sure? And in that moment he said, okay, no, like you said, giving permission. I just thought that choice was really
that is interesting. I guess it goes kind of back to where we said, you know, the reason what he wants is violence. Like, he
Yes.
doesn't actually want to find out how they did it or fix anything. Like, he just wants to have a war and fight in it. And so I think it probably goes back to that. Like, he went there really, he was acting like he was being all tough and smart about it and wise, but he just wanted to fight.
But he's looking for a fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that just gave him permission to, like, get that fight he went there for.
Yeah, it's just really interesting that it's almost posed like an eruption, but it's not actually. It really is a conscious choice, a conscious use of his agency.
Yeah, and I think this kind of just going into Loki's story too, like, I think this whole time, because you were mentioning, you know, all his plans, like, they played out.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, I don't know if he would have thought all of this would have happened. Like, I don't think he would have expected his father to banish Thor. Like, I don't know if I would have he would have expected Thor necessarily to be actually willing to go to Jotunheim. He's like, probably given the right push, but like not necessarily. I think his plan, really just basic level, is he just wants to make Thor look like a naive, not a good king, not ready to be king, and make himself look more logical and reasonable.
Yeah.
And he does that. Like, this whole first part, like, Thor looks reckless and dangerous, and Loki looks very intelligent, emotionally intelligent and reasonable through all of everything going on. And that's what Loki wants to happen. And so, like, I think that's literally all his plan was. Like, he even mentions later, this was kind of one of the comments that pointed out to me that maybe his plan wasn't necessarily all of this stuff. I think he mentions, like, I just wanted to keep Thor from the throne for longer, when he's talking to Laufey later about how he's the one that let them in. Spoiler alert. He tells Laufey, he says, I just wanted to give us a break from having Thor as king for a little while longer. And so I knew interrupting the coronation that way would give us at least a little bit more time, and give me a little bit more time to see if I can fix it. And so there's some level, like, he is power hungry, but he also is not wrong about Thor being reckless, and him pointing it out is actually probably better for Asgard anyway. Yeah. And for Thor. Yeah. So it's kind of just an interesting play within his plan that's actually a positive thing, but, like, it's just his intentions that end up not being as pure, and that's the problem. But, like, most of the movie, he's not wrong. Like, he's actually pretty correct in a lot of his decisions and stuff.
Yeah, because if we called that his whole plan, like, just protecting Asgard from Thor's reign, you could almost call that just, like, a positive intention. And that goes really well, but it's as those intentions get corrupted that things go bad and he goes bad.
Yeah, and you don't get the feeling too that he even hates his dad. Like, it's literally all targeted at Thor to start with, and he doesn't want Thor on the throne. He's fine with his dad to start with. It's just when he discovers more about his past that he starts to feel more hatred towards his dad.
It doesn't even feel like he hates Thor.
No.
Here at the beginning. No. It feels like he thinks Thor is an idiot.
Yes. And that Asgard shouldn't have him as king, and that he deserves to be king because he'd be a better one. And I'm like, honestly, again, is he wrong? I would argue no.
If he was a well-intentioned, good person, then he would probably be a better king. No, I would agree that the whole movie is not premeditated by Loki, because I agree that he probably didn't expect Odin to banish Thor. Because that was an extreme reaction, because Odin recognized that Thor needed something extreme to change him. And Loki didn't recognize that, or that Odin would recognize that. And so I would agree that Loki's plans do evolve as the movie continues. And maybe, I don't know.
I think his growing knowledge makes things more extreme. Like, it used beforehand, it was kind of just so, like, I'm kind of, you know, a little petulant about not getting the throne. And I also think, especially losing it to my brother, who I think is an idiot, and so it's kind of coming from that petty, jealous brother. But then as the things go on, it becomes much more hateful and malicious as he's going, because he learns things that he didn't know and feels very hurt, and so it just makes it so it's bigger
Okay,
than
I'm
it was
interested
before.
to keep breaking this
Anyway,
down and
okay.
see how it goes, see how I
Yes,
feel
we'll
about
see.
it.
We'll see.
I'm waiting for my mind to be changed.
Right. You know, maybe it won't be by the end, but
But it's already,
it
my
is
opinion has
interesting.
already become less extreme
Hey,
because I'm like,
good.
I mean, that's true. Like, he didn't come up with the whole plan at the beginning, so.
I would say, if nothing else, you could say yes, he's probably like one of the more interesting bad guys in the Marvel
Yeah,
universe.
even if,
for sure.
because I really didn't think he was that interesting. So even if by the end of this I'm like, okay, actually, no, it's a really interesting story, then I've changed for the better.
Take it. Okay. Great. We'll see how the rest of this goes. Okay. After Odin gets there, Thor is like, "Oh, we can take him on, Father." And he's like, "Shut up." He says, "Silence."
The fact that
It
Thor
is
is
very
like, oh,
cute.
good, you're
I know.
gonna join in.
Again, so naive
Yeah.
and youthful. Anyway.
And arrogant,
so-
thinking
and
like, oh
arrogant.
yeah, he'll recognize that I was actually
Yeah.
right.
Instead of realizing,
Jeez.
like, literally you guys were going to die if Odin hadn't showed up, and now you have destined our worlds to war, and that's not
Awesome.
fair. So, yeah, Odin comes down, and it's like, hey, Laufey, can we just, like, let this slide and recognize it's just the decisions of a boy?
Actions, yeah. Actions
And
of a
we
few.
shouldn't break this whole peace treaty just based on their actions and be forgiving and stuff. And Laufey's like, no, like, we're having war now. You've broken the treaty, whatever. And so he's like, okay, throws them all off, takes them through Heimdall back to Asgard. And he ends up having a conversation with Thor and Loki in the room. And he's like full on mad. He calls him a greedy and cruel boy, which he is, being a very greedy and arrogant and cruel boy. And Thor calls him an old man and a fool, which is not true or fair or good to call your dad.
Honor your
So,
parents,
yes.
guys.
Honor thy mother and father, please. So Odin ends up deciding that Thor needs something more drastic to learn and be humbled and recognize that he is not in a position to behave the way he's behaving. And so he ends up taking Thor's power via the hammer, and he sends Thor to Midgard, which is Earth. And he also sends the hammer just to a slightly different place. And we learn as the movie goes on that he had a reason for them being so close, but far apart at the same time, so that Thor could gain this humility and a better understanding of what it means to be a king, basically, and a leader. And so, yes, Thor, this brings us back to the beginning, where Jane hits him with a car. And he is calling for Heimdall and his dad to bring him back, and they won't. And then Darcy ends up tasing him because he's freaking her out, which, fair enough.
She literally says, he was freaking me out.
Yeah, he's freaking me out. And then later, when Jane's like, "You're the one who tasered him," and she said, "Yes, I did." She has no regrets. Anyway, I'm like, good for you, girl. Protect yourself from crazy big guys. Anyway, so they do take him to the hospital, and he's, of course, very thrown off, but also still arrogant and himself. So he's like thinking they're attacking him and like throwing people all over the place and doing all this damage in the hospital. Well, Jane goes home with her fellow scientists and intern, and they see the shape of a man in some of the pictures and images they got from the storm. And so they realize that he was actually in the storm, that he may know something about it that they don't from their readings. So they go back to get him, and he's broken out and is walking around, and she hits him with her car again, and they basically start to just talk with him a little bit. So then we're kind of flashing back and forth at this point between Thor and Loki. So flashing back to Loki, so during the fight, we should go back to during the fight when one of the they were told, don't let the frost giant grab you because it can cause like it's like a freeze burn basically thing that's going on. And Loki ends up being grabbed by one of the frost giants on the arm, and he's a little nervous, but then it just turns his skin blue like the frost giants. And so he starts to wonder, oh, am I a frost giant? Basically. And so he gets home, and we see this conversation between him and Odin where he's looking at the casket and thinking about things and picking it up, and it ends up turning his whole body to look like a frost giant. And then it reverts back, but he basically has realized, like, I don't think you've been honest with me, Dad. And so Odin ends up telling him basically during the original war with the frost giants, he found, after all the destruction and Asgard won, he found a baby inside the temple, and it was actually Laufey's son that he had left to die. And Odin decides to take him, and that baby was Loki. And it's interesting because I think this ties back again to agency with Odin and his choices and how that impacts Loki specifically, and Thor in a lot of ways, where earlier, like I said, they talk about, you were both born to be kings, even though only one of you will take the throne. And in his mind, probably his intention with taking Loki was in part because he was just a baby and he wanted to take him, which I truly believe that was at least in his heart somewhere. Yeah. Loki kind of doesn't believe it, but I think that was true. But he also wants to see if maybe potentially, I'm assuming he was waiting till Laufey died and then putting Laufey's son Loki on the throne for the frost giants, and then have Thor on the throne for Asgard, and then they would work as a team and bring about a greater peace and unity between the two worlds. But due to everything that's happened, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. But he never told Loki any of this. He had no idea he was adopted. It was the big adoption reveal. And this,
which I would agree is problematic.
Yeah. Yes.
If he wanted to put him on the throne one day, Loki needed to be prepared for that.
He needed to know. That's one of those agency things where I'm like, I think honesty with your children is almost always the best choice.
Yeah, anything that a child is capable of understanding and in a healthy and comprehending in a healthy way, there's no reason not to keep it. Yeah.
It's not going to help anything. It's just going to make things more drama filled in the future if you don't.
So bad choice on Odin's side, but coming from good intentions, but still affects Loki in a negative way, regardless of those good intentions.
And those consequences come back to bite Odin in the butt
drastic.
Over and over and over again.
And everyone else.
So, yeah, Loki finds this out, and so he grows very angry for obvious reasons, and is yelling at Odin. And this is where we first see, he's actually angry at Odin now. It's not just, and his mom, too. I feel like his mom less so, because, again, I think his mom's kind of been the only person he's really connected with within Asgard anyway, and so I'm sure it's harder for him to really fully be angry with his mom. And I think there was always a little bit of a feeling of his mom kind of choosing Loki in certain situations over Thor, and I feel like she was more balanced about it than Odin probably was. But anyway, all that to say, I think he gets very angry, and he's officially angry at more than just Thor. And so
it's the first time we see him lose control, too.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, he's been so in control of himself this whole time, and this is where he freaks out. It. Yeah, and I don't know if it's the stress of it. I don't really understand the Odin sleep, basically, where he falls into a coma. Basically, something, I'm assuming he just has some sort of condition that causes him to kind of fall into these comas.
The fact that it's called Odin sleep is actually the most hysterical thing to me in the movie.
He's like, it's his thing.
What does
Loki
does
say? This every 100 years.
Yeah, he's like, he's fallen into the Odin sleep. And I'm like, the Odin sleep? Can anyone else have an Odin sleep? Do I have Kariana sleeps? Is that what?
For a group of people who aren't actually gods, according to y'all, just the people on Earth called you that, y'all act like gods.
Yeah.
I'll be like, I'm going to name this condition after myself, and it will have a "the" in front of it.
The. That's what really does it. Is the Odin sleep.
The Odin sleep.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So if you know what the Odin sleep is, again, feel free to nerd out in the comments about Norse mythology.
All of this, the Norse mythology and the just comics of it, because I know they're different in a lot of ways, but...
Yeah, fair. Since we're having a conversation about agency, and since this is the first time Loki has lost control, I don't really have a full thought here, so maybe this is a useless thing that shouldn't go in, but I'm just really interested in the things that take away agency, and how much we take away agency from ourselves and other people take agency away, or circumstances take, kind of the three categories of sin, right? Is like our own choices, other people's choices, and fallen world. Like, if I'm being really frank, I really firmly believe we all have our own agency. We all make our own decisions. But I also get really angry and make poorer decisions when I'm really angry. And so I'm like, I firmly believe in this idea that we all have our agency, but also sometimes it does feel like I have less of it. It's like I don't blame myself as much for my actions when I'm in duress or under certain circumstances, or even when other people do certain things, And I think I blame myself for allowing myself to get angry and to get to that point. But like the fact that I make those poor decisions feels like to be blamed on the fact that I let myself get so emotional, rather than like I wasn't thinking as clearly, because obviously I couldn't think as clearly. And so I don't know. That's just, again, I don't have like a full thought. It's just the idea of like Odin's actions and combined with Loki's emotions getting in the way and affecting like his intentions and his decisions. Yeah. Based on that. But then once he calms down to the fact that he calms down and comes up with more manipulative plans based on the anger that he feels, rather than calming down and making better decisions. I don't know, just an interesting play to me there, where I'd like to understand and think about more like, can agency really be eliminated, or am I just trying to make myself feel better in a way?
For sure. Yeah, I would say almost, I think he ends up letting his anger drive him even when it is calm enough that he doesn't have to. Yeah. But I think in that moment, I think he says words, and the fact that he kind of puts his father in a position where he falls into the Odin sleep. Yeah. That I think he doesn't want to do that necessarily in that moment. He uses it to he uses it to his advantage. He's like, okay, I guess I'll deal with this and use it. But he also, like, you can tell in that moment he's actually upset that he did that to his dad. Yeah. And that he was yelling at him like that. Like, he's still angry at him, but he definitely has some level of guilt over that, which makes him a great anti-hero, I would say. Or maybe, I don't know, what's the opposite, where it's like more villainous but like has heroic moments, or like more empathy in him.
A sympathetic villain? I don't know.
A sympathetic villain, maybe, that's a good one. Anyway, I think it's really interesting, because you just see moments where he has some humanity, and you're like, he could be just manipulating, but I'm like, not all of the time.
I think
there's definitely moments where he actually feels something. This episode has been divided into 2 parts. You have reached the end of part 1. Part 2 will be released the following Thursday. We hope you enjoyed the first half of our discussion. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at God and All Things Podcast. Additionally, if you are interested in seeing what Tori is currently reading, head over to her YouTube channel, Good Strong Words. Thank you again for listening. We hope you are having a wonderful day. Keep remembering to see God in all things, and we will see you next time. Bye!